So let's talk about that final subtype, harmonizing ENTPs. What are the characteristics and jobs that this subtype would want to go toward?
Okay, so harmonizing ENTPs are, and we've mentioned this every time we've talked about this subtype, they are almost always an older version of an ENTP.
Yeah.
They have, they've mastered a few really important things, and kind of like the normalizing subtype, they have a bit of a more chill vibe. And they're more support oriented. They're very supportive. So Dario describes them as supportive facilitators. They're patient. They are energized by deep passion and broad principles. So they're not going to be the bouncing all over the place ENTP or the kind that's debating all the time and arguing all the time. This is going to be more that has a really strong theoretical bent. They're really good at asking open-ended questions. In fact, they're far more likely to debate with somebody through asking questions than, like asserting opinions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this is a very reflective version. In fact, in EEG scans, there's a back bias in these that indicates a particular form of reflection. And they tend to be much more about reaching out to people, guiding them, inspiring them. They are good at listening. They're like, just like the normalizing that has gotten good at listening, the harmonizing has also developed a capacity for listening and observing. But they're doing it from a sophisticated theoretical basis. They're not just listening for content. They're listening to match that information into broad theoretical frameworks, which is a major guide for how they do anything. They are also good at looking at things from multiple angles, at multiple scales, and then figuring out exactly what layer a person is talking about. So I'm just going to read Dario's example because I thought this was so good. He said, for example, when looking at economic issues, there's the large scale of national, global, and cross-cultural power dynamics. Then there's the mid-scale of finances and functioning of a specific industry or organization. And finally, there's smaller scale groups within those. So whenever you're talking about a subject, it's going to be the harmonizing ENTP that just instinctively knows, well, first of all, we've got to figure out what scale we're talking about because they're thinking about it in multiple scales simultaneously. And so they're good at listening and observing because they're trying to figure out where exactly on these scales is the other person talking about? What exactly in this multiple scenario structure is the person talking? And they're good at listening to meet the person where they're at in that conversation. Yeah. Which not all ENTPs have the capacity for that. Sometimes they just make assumptions and jump to. Right? They just listen to a little bit of information and they assume they know what the person's talking about. This ENTP is more likely to wait and try to figure out exactly where the person is coming from because it's not always obvious initially.
So as you're talking and explaining this, the image I'm getting is, it basically sounds like you're describing a mature ENTP. Not a certain subtype, but somebody that has maturity and seasoning. Because I'm trying to imagine a 15-year-old that's wired this way as an ENTP. And it's hard for me to imagine a 15-year-old ENTP that has this finesse and this grace and all of this you're talking about. But if I imagine ENTP at the age of 60, yeah, I could see that. So I guess it brings up the question, the thought that some of these subtypes they come about through the maturation process of life as we grow and move. And I wonder if we could see a harmonizing, again, ENTP at the age of 15.
Well, I will say this. We usually talk about this at the end of the subtype, but this subtype, the neurotransmitter relationship they have is to estrogen. Yeah. So just as a little note, the majority of people who identify as an ENTP are men. It's a smaller percentage of ENTPs that identify as women. And so because of that, if somebody does have a preference for the harmonizing subtype and they're younger, right? They're not well seasoned into their 50s and 60s, but they're younger. It's probably more likely to be somebody who has a preference for estrogen. It's more likely to be a woman because she's been socialized that direction and because she just naturally has a preference for estrogen. So female ENTPs are more likely at a younger age to tap into the harmonizing or be the harmonizing subtype.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what they need to do is they need to choose careers that encourage them to get into a more assertive place because they actually are ENTPs that don't know how to stick up for themselves as much. But an ENTP that is older that is harmonizing may have, especially if they are a man, they might have started out with a preference for testosterone or dopamine or serotonin. Like they may have been more assertive and then found themselves going to this direction as they got older.
Yeah.
In Jungian theory, for those of you who are geeks, this is a time period maybe they've integrated their anima. But this might be something they found later in life.
Yeah.
Whereas a younger ENTP woman might have been socialized into this, but still have, she needs to kind of get more of that dominant energy going if possible, because that's the stick up for yourself side. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that in here too, I think.
Did we go over the jobs that this subtype might choose?
Not yet. So these are not dogmatic, loud, or pushy ENTPs. So they're not that good at necessarily doing hardcore marketing like some the other ENTPs. Like a dominant or a creative ENTP might be much better at marketing. They're probably going to be a lot better at promotional and selling styles of jobs. The ENTP is not going to be that great at those unless they teach themselves that. But they are going to be very they're going to be a lot better at things that require a softer touch. All the same ENTP skills, but a little bit more of a softer touch. So things like human resource specialist, consultant for management, education and training. Anything in education and training is usually right up their alley. Public policy analyst might be something that's up their alley. Market research analyst. So instead of doing the marketing and the promotion, they're analyzing marketing and promotional things. Counselor or therapist is very common for harmonizing subtypes. There were even things like meditation and mindfulness instructor, which I thought was interesting. Research psychologist, life coach, and spiritual counselor was on the list.
A lot of those things that lend themselves to your energy, Antonia. Some of the career choices you made. You're a coach. You help people. You want to tap into higher esoteric spiritual principles. Do you identify as the harmonizing?
I do. I do. I suspect that I have a harmonizing subtype preference, but I am trying to train myself out of it. I'm trying to choose I'm actually going more towards the creative subtype. I'm trying to get more of that analytic energy inside of me because I think I was trained into being a harmonizing ENTP, and I'm missing some of the skills that are available to me in other subtypes.
So that's a really key point that we can start to wrap up with. By the way, the attunement, before we move on to the point I want to make from that, the attunement of the functions.
Yes.
Both are holistic.
They are. Yeah. They're the opposite of the dominant.
Yeah.
So if the dominant is, both of them are analytic, assertive energy, and have a preference for the neurotransmitter of testosterone, this is the exact opposite. Both of the function preferences is for holistic. So it's a very open, framed, takes in a lot of information, but doesn't really focus on any one thing specifically.
Yeah.
And has that preference for estrogen.
Yeah.